I'm Dr. Theresa Bullard, and this is Mystery Teachings. What does it mean to be multidimensional beings? And how do we expand our awareness to harness the fullness of who we are? In this season of Mystery Teachings, we embark on a journey of self-discovery and transformation through the 22 archetypes of our multidimensional self. So a big part of this journey is about helping us to, one, recognize our multidimensionality, to recognize how these 22 archetypes play in our own life, but also how they play in the life of our higher self that has these 22 different parallel lives. Oh, what do we mean by parallel lives? Well, the idea goes back to our true self as being something that is beyond this hologram of this physical universe. So if we were to think of our true self as being beyond the hologram, beyond the quantum sea, in a place metaphysically that we call the Great Central Sun, from that place of our true self, there are 22 archetypal rays or aspects of that true self that are sent out through the universe. And they go to different planets, so each one becomes like a being on a different planet. And then from those different places where our true self emanates out to, it then reflects those rays and those energies back to all the other 22 planets again. So we have one of those planets is here on Earth, but we could also be out in the Sirius system, we could be out in the Pleiades, we could be having various aspects of ourself in 22 different planets. And then from those places, those 22 archetypes get reflected back here to Earth. And our higher self that has its emanations here on Earth then has 22 archetypes also being emanated down to Earth and incarnating. So when we say parallel lives, it's like we have 22 different aspects of our higher self living out these lives here on Earth in parallel with each other, but they're either on slightly different frequencies or they're just different people who are having a life under a different archetypal influence. It's kind of similar to why we don't hear all the radio stations being broadcast all at once, because we're only tuned in to one frequency station. And as we become more aware of these archetypes and how they play out in our lives, we can then start to consciously connect with our higher self, and then that will also help us consciously connect with these parallel lives. And the whole goal is to ultimately bring those 22 into one, to bring them all to coherence, so that we can live as our higher self, fully embodied and manifested into this physical life. So that is a matter of becoming aware, becoming more expanded in our consciousness of who we are, and then as we merge those 22 down to one, and we live as our higher self, then our higher self steps on to its next journey of not only mastering this life here on Earth, but then becoming a galactic being and connecting with its other 22 emanations on other planets. Now, if we had this kind of multidimensional awareness of all these parallel lives, our entire worldview would shift from how it is today. For one thing, judgments would fade away. We'd no longer judge our mistakes because we'd realize that all of them brought different learning opportunities. We'd also no longer feel competitive or jealous about the success of others, because in one of our parallel lives and realities, we are the champion and the best of our class. So many of the frailties of our human ego would vanish because of this expanded awareness of our total self. Now, why 22? Well, it's based on the structure of the Tree of Life. There are 10 spheroid on the Tree of Life and 22 paths that connect those together. The spheres represent objective states of being, while the pathways represent the subjective experience of traveling between them, and they're often referred to as states of becoming. These 22 pathways basically define the key lessons and transformations that we're meant to go through in life. Each path invokes an energy that brings movement, and it shifts us from one state of being to another. In essence, they catalyze spiritual and personal alchemy. Is there anything that can help us better understand what these archetypes are? Fortunately, yes. And while there's many layers to these archetypes, one tool that we can use that makes them more relatable to our physical lives is the major arcana of the tarot. Now, the term arcana comes from the Latin arcanum, which basically means a mystery or a secret. Now, before we go much further, let me first clarify that tarot does not come from Kabbalah, but it can be related because the Tree of Life is a universal template for organizing information about our lives and the universe as a whole. And the major arcana do relate to the 22 archetypes of our physical life experiences, so they can be mapped onto the Tree of Life and its 22 paths. These correlations of the archetypes to the paths were first made by a French initiate, Eliphas Levi, over 100 years ago, and then he was followed by other initiates of the Western Mystery School tradition. Although there are still some debates about the exact order and mapping. So for our purposes in this journey, we'll follow the sequence of the universal Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck. This deck was first designed in 1909 by Arthur Edward Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith, two initiates of the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Now, the reason that we use this deck is that Waite was a scholar of alchemy, Kabbalah, Hermetics, and other initiatory teachings, and he drew from his vast knowledge, training, and insights into mystical wisdom. And then he teamed up with Pamela Smith to incorporate this into her intuitive artistry. And the result of their collaboration produced one of the most universal, accurate, and pure decks of archetypal and alchemical symbolism. Where does tarot come from? Well, the tarot that we know of today mostly traces its history back to Renaissance Italy and France. Now, during the Renaissance, the artists deliberately infused Hermetic and alchemical wisdom into their art. But the wisdom they drew from had its roots in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools of Thoth, the god of wisdom, thousands of years earlier. The major arcana, or the 22 keys of the tarot, is a picture book of wisdom that depicts the journey of mystical ascension and transformation. Now, of course, telling a story through images was not new in the Renaissance. Now, after all, this is what the hieroglyphs on the temple walls of ancient Egypt and Sumer were all about. And what the Renaissance artists were basically doing was reinterpreting the Egyptian hieroglyphs into European-style imagery. Now, according to oral teachings that I've received in the Modern Mystery School, the 22 archetypes depicted in the major arcana were actually originally brought to Earth by the family of Ra, who are a race of evolved intergalactic and interdimensional beings. And they visited this planet many times to support our progression of life on Earth. Now, the original 22 archetypes were essentially anchored in the forms of what we call the gods and goddesses of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. They embodied the original multidimensional patterns of universal energies, meaning these archetypes were not just about humans, they were universal. But by the beginning of the 1900s, the various tarot decks throughout Europe had become more artistic than accurate. So when Waite and Smith set out to make a new deck, they wanted it to be both artistic and accurate. They wanted to restore it to the universal archetypes, but in a way that we can more easily relate to today. Now, as we explore the tarot in this journey, it's not for the purposes of divination, but rather we're using them as windows into the self. Now, at the same time, we can, of course, use these as tools to ask questions, and they can help us see past our blind spots, our emotional attachments, and our mental illusions. They show us the map of our own mind and soul. Each card is full of meaning and layers of symbolism that help us to connect to the archetypes. And the symbols and the images, they act like bridges or links that help lead us back to their source within the archetypal realm. Symbols are the language of the unconscious. They provide a tool for our conscious mind to communicate with our unconscious and with the universal mind. Now, each major arcana key helps to bridge the gap between this hologram that we live in and the spiritual worlds that are beyond the hologram.